Thank you, Devin and panel. I think it's fair to say that every single session today has talked a little bit about education and training, and the next panel will really be focused exclusively on that. So with the changing nature of work and its implications on education and training, there's obviously a very big conversation at a national and a regional level. I'm sure you've heard it at some of the Democratic debates, although I might argue it needs to be more central than it is, but it's everywhere, it's pervasive, and it's important. So over the next 40 minutes, we're going to hear from a panel of experts who will explore how the labor market is changing and current strategies to promote human capital development. Each of them really represent key innovations and different experiments and learnings from those. And it's really important that we have representatives from across community colleges to private sector-led certifications as well as online education. To help drive this conversation, we also have task force member, MIT Sloan professor of human resources and management, Paul Osterman, who wears many hats as well, including his role in Good Companies, Good Jobs. But he's going to help us manage this panel and also really show kind of the benefit and what we can learn from this. Just last week, he was in the Boston Globe featured around how to turn bad jobs into good jobs, and I would really urge you to take a look at that. But with that, please welcome Paul and panelists to the stage. Thank you.
We got to mix up the ladies and the men.
Ecco, Susi. Whatever?
Okay.
Siéntate.
Gracias.
Pues de nada. Welcome. We're very pleased to be here. So, as Sarah Jean just said, there's a great deal of anxiety about the direction that the future of work is taking, the implications for people. It has implications for young people as they're getting their schooling and entering the labor market. Middle-aged folks need to somehow stay up to date in their skills so that they can keep their jobs. Older workers who are unfortunately dislocated, as a term of art in economics goes, need to be able to find new jobs. And we have a very large population of people trapped in low-wage work who are left behind. Skills and training is not the solution to all those problems. I think it's really important to understand that, but it's certainly part of the solution. So we have the strength of this panel is that we've got folks from every kind of perspective on this issue. I will introduce our panel very, very briefly, not doing real justice to anybody. Susie Levine is commissioner of the Washington State Employment Security Department, the job training and workforce organization in that state. She also brings an international perspective to these issues. She was ambassador to Sweden and Liechtenstein and is an expert on the apprenticeship system, and I'm sure we'll hear about that. Guillermo Miranda is the global head of social responsibility at IBM. In the space that we're talking about, IBM has become very well known through its PTECH programs, which are essentially a modernized form of vocational education and training in high schools. Guillermo has had leadership positions basically all over the world for IBM. Annetta Parker is the president of South Central Community College in Minnesota. Community colleges are the 800-pound gorilla of skills training in this country. There's about 6 million people in credit programs, about another 6 million people in non-credit workforce-oriented programs. Before entering education, the field of education, Annette had a career at General Motors, so she knows the real world. And this is the real world. And she's been very active in the national discussions around employment and training. Jacob Shu is CEO of Catalyte. You just heard the paid public service announcement about Catalyte. And we'll hear about Catalyte because one of the important components of the American skills training system is this sudden emergence of these new models, ranging from coding academies to online courses of one kind or another. It's been enormous proliferation, which we need to get our arms around. And I assume in classic Silicon Valley fashion, Jacob's resume lists about 4 other firms that he's been the CEO of. I assume he left successfully each of them and wasn't fired from any of them. So we're going to take it away. I'm going to begin with a quick question to each of you, ask you to kind of spend a couple of minutes, and then we'll get engaged in the discussion. So my question is, we're going to just move down the row, is kind of what problem are you addressing, and what's your vision for solving that problem? Guillermo.
Thank you for having me here. Pleasure to be in Boston in such a nice day, by the way, sunny and great temperature. Look, in IBM, what we believe, there is 2 sides of the equation. Then there is first a business situation that we are trying to solve. We need the skills for ourselves and for our clients. The success of our business group grow depends not only on getting the right talent to do what we need to do, but having our clients and the ecosystems of our clients having the right talent to know how to use that technology, the intersection of business and technology. And the other side of the equation is we are helping also with a society problem, because I think that there is a growing digital divide between the digital literacy, AI understanding, the have and the have-nots. So social tension happens when you have, for instance, in the US, a very clear division between what happens in the 2 coasts, East and West Coast, and what they call the flyover country. So where are the key jobs? Everybody look at Silicon Valley, Boston, New York. And if you don't create this opportunity across, you are creating society tension. So we are addressing the business side of the equation because this is part of our mission, but we are also helping on how we bridge the gap on digital literacy.
Terrific. Annette.
Okay, so community and technical colleges across the United States represent students that may be juniors or seniors in high school. They may be, on average age, they're 26 years old, but they could be as old as 60. And they're looking to reskill or to transfer to a 4-year institution. They may be also just looking at getting a skill, getting a career, and getting a job. Because of the challenges of the demographics all coming together in a college setting, it makes an interesting educational environment. They're the most at-risk populations in the United States for the most part. There's food insecurities, clothing insecurities, and our communities depend on this future workforce if they're going to be profitable and equitable. So as a community college, it's our responsibility to work with the community to make sure that we're preparing the workforce of the future. So what's going on in community colleges also is it's the most diverse higher education entities in the country. Right now, for example, in one of my districts, 50% of my students in K-12 are students of color. And we know in Minnesota that if we do not address that, we're not going to have the workforce of the future. So how do you make sure that more students are successful, that they are on a career path to a middle class or above occupation? You have to think about really focusing on providing supports and wraparound services for students to be successful.
Great. Jacob.
So Catalyte, we exist to solve a really big problem, which is to close the skills gap in the tech workforce. Right? How do we do that? We use AI and data science to find remarkable, brilliant people from all walks of life that's hidden in plain sight. We're literally talking about people who may have been truck drivers, retail and food service workers, teachers, even doctors and PhDs, that we know using our technology that with the right learning journey, we can get them to become the elite engineers, the top 2% of software and data engineers in the industry. We then actually hire them, oftentimes sight unseen, put them through a 2-year computer science degree in just 20 weeks, and then put them to work delivering engineering for our clients as part of Agile Scrum teams. Our clients, who are primarily Fortune 1000 companies, they benefit because they now can tap into a diverse, affordable, sustainable, and scalable workforce, engineering workforce, anywhere in the United States. Right? So it's not located to any location. It could be anywhere in the US. And at the same time, we're actually providing an access, democratizing access to these professions of the future for extraordinary people from all walks of life. Today, we have 3 pieces of good news that I love always sharing. Number 1 is we can actually prove that these teams are actually outperforming existing engineering teams. So CIOs and CTOs can literally build teams that can, for example, be optimized for retention. We can build teams that are 2.5 times, have 2.5 times better retention than existing teams. You want velocity, you have some new product that have to be built that you just need to crank out features for users. We can build teams that are optimized for velocity. And we can build teams that are 30% faster velocities in sprints. Or we can build teams that are optimized for efficiency or productivity, right? You think about cost savings. And we literally have clients now who will go on record telling people that they are actually building teams in their own communities in the US that are 2 times more productive than the average tier 1 offshoring teams, right? So it changes the games in terms of really talking about business outcomes. The second piece of good news that we can share is really around diversity. So we can prove that using this model to workforce development, you end up with a workforce that mirrors the demographics of the cities that you hire from. So we're headquartered in Baltimore by design. We put ourselves there because Baltimore is frankly one of the worst cities when it comes to social mobility. And we've actually proven that over the last 6 years in Baltimore, the Baltimore metro area, the city and the county added together, was 28% African American. Over that same period of time, we had 29% African American developers. About a third of our workforce are female developers, and our new cohorts are rapidly approaching gender parity. So you can actually get to diversity the right way without having to resort to a lot of these heavy-handed diversity measures. And the last thing I'll share, the good news, is really around the impact that we're making in people's lives. So literally, the average salary of a person joining Catalyte in the last job they had before they came over was between $24,000 and $25,000 a year. The average salary 5 years later in the company is $98,000 a year. So they're getting a 4 times income uplift in that period of time. And that continues from there, right? So literally 9 out of 10 people who come through this company are going all the way into these professions and becoming those elite engineers.
Great, thank you. Susan.
So I'm here with 2 hats. One is as a former ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein, where I saw the answer. And then the other is as the Commissioner of Careers for Washington State, where I'm trying to put some of those answers into action. And so I'd say some of the problems, when I was in my previous role, the challenge was wanting to be able to recognize that we had 7 million jobs going unfilled in the United States for lack of skills, $1.5 trillion in student debt being borne across 44 million individuals, crushing us as a nation. And yet at the same time, we had millions of people looking for jobs and opportunities. How do you match those? And what I saw in Switzerland was a really profound apprenticeship model where 70% of young people do apprenticeship, not high school. And they've created a system with almost 250 different pathways. And I found the pathway to the American dream in Switzerland, which was kind of unusual. And so then I brought a lot of that back here, working in close partnership with a number of Swiss companies and now with a number of different governments, and especially now with Governor Inslee in Washington State, to really try to seed that and grow that and build an American apprenticeship renaissance here in the United States. With my role as commissioner, what I'm also responsible for is areas where we help people during their job transitions, unemployment insurance, paid family medical leave, labor market statistics, also working on areas related to H-2A, so guest worker programs in Washington State around agriculture. And what's very clear to me is that government as a system focuses on how do we help people when they hit those transitions. A student graduates, an agricultural worker, their season ends, a military spouse moves, a transitioning service member leaves the military, an incarcerated individual gets released from prison, a mature worker, their job changes because of AI and automation. Our focus in government right now is on when they've hit that transition and have lost the dignity of work. How can we focus upstream and help those individuals get equipped before they ever hit those transitions? How do we shift our structures so that they can maintain and sustain that dignity of work, and we can maintain and sustain the workforce that's ready and that is lifelong career ready? So yes, from youth, but actually starting creating a culture of career in middle school on up. You heard our Dean Williams talking about that, all the way up through retirement. So that's sort of the span in connecting my two hats that I'm wearing here today.
Great, thank you. I'm now going to ask each of you a question. So we'll kind of go back down the row again. So Guillermo, as I mentioned, IBM, vocational education in this country has a bad odor to it. It's always been seen as kind of the place where you throw the kids who are not successful. There have been a lot of efforts to change that, and Massachusetts actually has very high quality technical high schools. PTECH, I think, is emerging as a national model for improving schooling, vocational schooling. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Absolutely. So look, in IBM, what we saw is how, over time, the education track was separated from the industry track. So when you start early in the 20th century to really go forcibly into high school and then the university as a promise, there was a connection at some point. IBM developed with Columbia University in 1936 the first computer science curriculum in this country. Okay? But over time, it was a different reality. Academia worked with their own problems and industry worked with their own problems, and we got divorced. With good exceptions, but in general, we got divorced. So what we are trying to say is, look, in order to get jobs and to get skill ready, it's not about the diploma that you can get. There is not a single reality where you have to do college, you have to work, and then retire. No, the reality can be much more iterative. So PTECH is precisely that. It's putting together a partnership on the ground between the school district, the community college that is next to that, an industry partner. And what we create is ramps on into healthy careers and skills that are needed by the industry. So the heavy lifting is to sit in a single table, the superintendent of schools, the president of the community college, and the HR business person from the industry partner and say, okay, what do we do with the curriculum? How we align this to the jobs that are waiting here in the community, because this industry partner is for the community. So it's a partnership model. It's also important to say that it plays on the strengths that already exist. So these are public high schools focused usually on underserved communities. The model now has extended to 25 countries. We have 220 schools open in this school year with more than 600 industry partners, including SAP, Volkswagen, American Airlines, Bosch, Telstra, many key companies in the different countries. So if you put together the right ingredients, you can get a solution, and this is what we can call is the apprenticeship of the 21st century. That's how you go there.
That's terrific. So I will come, after we go down the row, I'm going to come back and ask you about working with school systems, because when you talk to businesses, they say it's a complete pain in the butt to work with the schools. And when you talk to the schools, you say these business people don't understand anything. And I want to hear about that. So we'll come back to that. Annette, so the evaluation evidence on community colleges is that if you either graduate with a degree or a certificate, the rate of return is high. Nationally, maybe 20 to 30% of people who enter community colleges get a degree or certificate within 6 years. What are you doing to fix that? And what are you doing to fix it, and what's the broader challenge for community colleges in fixing that?
Well, the broader challenge with community colleges is the average age of the student. Their parents, the average age of my students are 26 years old, and so they have jobs. And so they're generally part-time students, and you have to figure out how you can get them to complete their courses. And they have other challenges. They're usually working low-wage jobs. Some of the things that we're doing to assist our students is working with our foundation. We have what you call emergency grants, where we help them if they have an emergency, they need a battery for their car. Something that simple will stop out a community college student. How do you make sure they have scholarships? The other thing that we're doing is apprenticeships. And I want to talk about Guillermo's example, because in one of my communities, I have a campus in Faribault, Minnesota, which I just spoke about being 50% new immigrants, basically, students of color. And we could not get the school ratings were low, so property values were going down. The business community was concerned about that. Other people were, more affluent people were moving out of the community. So what we did was partner with IBM and create a PTECH program. The school district tried to pass a referendum to get more money to, and it failed miserably. So then they came to the table with the chamber, the community college, and the business community, and now we're starting a PTECH this year with Mayo Clinic and Alina Clinic in healthcare for that population. So that's an example of apprenticeship. And then how do you advance other apprenticeships? In the state of Minnesota, we recognize that if we do not address the changing demographics of our community, we're not going to have a workforce for the future. And so the state legislature has invested in scholarships for high demand occupations. They've created what we call the Pipeline Program, which is an apprenticeship program that provides grants to employers that take apprentices. And then the dual training program is set up like a European apprenticeship model, pays the students' tuition. So the employer's getting a benefit to have a journeyman train or educate the student, the apprentice, as well as the apprentice's tuition is paid, half of it, and then the foundations at the community colleges are matching the other half.
But this is your opportunity to say community colleges are radically underfunded by government.
They are.
Relative to four-year non-research institutions.
Yes.
We have to fix that. Do you want to say that?
That's very true. Maybe I could be less of a fundraiser if that were the case. You know, I think that all presidents are fundraisers these days, but in higher education, yes, community colleges are always at the bottom, even though we serve the largest population of students in the United States.
Great. So, Jacob, so what you describe is extremely impressive program with good results. I want to ask you kind of a two-part question about it. One is scale for the program, going to some kind of scale. And the other is, it's a program clearly for people who are extremely talented. Now, in Lake Wobegon, everybody's extremely talented, but clearly that's actually not true. Does your model have promise for the rest of us?
Well, the mantra of our R&D team is everybody's a superhero. We have to help them figure out their superpower, right? And what we started actually with engineering and then eventually data engineering jobs is that those are jobs where you can quantify outcomes, right? Which is actually the beginning part of this, right? Is that you have to first define what does excellence in that role actually mean, right? Which is, you know, most employers have a pretty fuzzy notion of that, right? If you start looking at how companies hire engineers today, most of the times it's this checklist-based approach to like hiring engineers, which really, if you think about anybody who's come out of engineering will tell you that, you know, the best engineers aren't the people who went to the four-year universities or were math nerds in high school. The best engineers were kids who taught themselves how to code when they were younger, right? And have a passion for it. So our model really is based on getting rid of pedigree, right? Actually looking at demonstrated problem-solving ability. So, you know, at a very basic level, what our technology does is that we're not really interested in what you know. In fact, by design, we don't ingest any background information. We don't care where you went to school or if you went to school. We don't care if you had a job or not. What we care about is how you do on an assessment. Now, this assessment that we have is pretty unique in the sense that your answers don't really matter that much, right? So it's not really what do you know and if you can actually answer a set of math questions. What matters to us is how do you interact with this test? How do you go about solving these complex problems? And that exposes a lot about how a person thinks, So we found that people who think a certain way we can predict are going to be highly successful engineers. And by the way, if you look at it, people always assume, well, you must be hiring people from great schools and making them engineers. No, we're actually, if you look at our workforce, only half of our workforce has a 4-year degree. A third have a high school diploma. Right? Average age of people coming in is 33 years old, but it ranges anywhere from 17-year-olds to 72-year-olds. So it is a very broad cross-section of society. I mean, we are proving every day through data science that talent and ability is evenly distributed. So, our ultimate vision as a company is I kind of joke, is to be like the Harry Potter sorting hat, right? That someday you'll be able to, take an assessment and we can direct you to any number of careers that you can be the highest performing and the most successful at. And that for us is really kind of the key problem, is that you've got to make people successful in professions. It's not about just landing a person a job, right? That first job is really important. So the entry-level job is really critical. But what we have to be able to do is get people on a track where they can truly become professional knowledge workers of the future.
Right. So, Susie, the United States is characterized by an extremely confusing system of skill training, right? Schools, community colleges, programs such as Jacobs, the Wild West, firms, and so on. But it has a big strength, which is you could change your mind. I could actually, if I had any talent, go to Jacob and get rid of this crappy job and become something better, right? So
$98,000 a year, right?
Right, right. So you contrast that with the kind of like the image, I'm not saying necessarily the reality, of the European system, which is fairly rigid. You get into an apprenticeship and you move along, and that's what you're going to be for the rest of your life. Could you talk about how you can take the apprenticeship model and adapt it to kind of the American culture and reality?
So I think that image, the Germans are very good at marketing themselves, and the Swiss are much more humble. And so what I found when I was there is that the model in Switzerland is not that rigid at all. In the mid-90s, what they found was that we had exported the notion that university was required to succeed. And unfortunately, that was starting to take root in Switzerland. So they adapted their system to actually increase the permeability, meaning that you can go on from your apprenticeship to higher education. You can go from finishing high school to an apprenticeship. Your apprenticeship that you do does not define you for life, but it does prepare you for life in the Swiss model. And why it is being so readily lapped up here, whether in Colorado or Washington State or elsewhere, is because it is much more palatable to American tastes. One of the things that we did a delegation trip with Governor Inslee and 45 business, philanthropic, academic, and labor leaders to Switzerland. And we had Alan Golston, who's the head of the US Gates Foundation, and his primary lens was on equity. How do we make sure that we are providing equitable access to this and that it is a pathway for those seeking equity? And within a day, he was resolved. This solves it, because there's no tracking per se. You do take a test to determine, are you a practical learner or are you an academic learner? But that decision of which you are does not then dictate your path. I met plenty of individuals, this one young woman working in their aerospace firm who started as a veterinarian apprentice, decided that she didn't like doing that, and now is doing aerospace design for her apprenticeship. Sergio Ermati, the CEO of UBS, he started as a banking apprentice, so he has continued on that path, but the president of Switzerland right now, who is also their Minister of Finance, started as a farming apprentice. So it is prestigious, it is diverse, and there are lots of different pathways that you can follow in that permeability. That is what we are modeling in Washington State. It is what is being modeled. And one of the keys is partners, most importantly with business and with the academic environment, because without businesses making those opportunities available, then there's no pathway. Without the community colleges and the universities understanding how do you receive those credentials, there's no pathway. And so I think one of the big challenges that we will face in the coming years is, it is the wild, wild west right now, and we're going to need to make sure that for those credentials to have value, that we do put some level of currency behind them, consistency and quality. If I can't tell, if I go to the Annette Corporation and I get my apprenticeship from the Annette Corporation, and Jacob has no idea what that means unless there's a particular angle on it. So I think that's going to be what we see over these next 5 to 10 years is who's in a position to administer that level of quality control, who's in that position to manage the currency of this, and to ensure that as we open up these additional pathways, those pathways and the quality of how people are doing is consistent.
That's great, thank you. So that's a perfect segue to my next kind of question. This is a question to everybody. We'll go down again, which is, what's the role of public policy here? So you each run an operation, but it's kind of a small operation in a massive country, right? And it's very hard for any company to put the resources at scale, any school, whatever. What's the role of policy? So Susie mentioned one role of public policy, which is to kind of be an arbiter of standards and quality. Are there other, and then money, but that's an obvious point. Beyond that, what can we say about the role of government in making this all work? Do you have?
Yeah.
Well, I'll start because I'm a state college, and I'm part of the Minnesota state system of 37 colleges and universities. And so we present a statewide legislative agenda to receive our funding. And state funding, pretty much across the board, I'd say most states have went down over the years, which brings challenges with increasing tuition and fees, and also on fundraising. And so you really need to focus on the economics of your state or your community, and really have a set agenda with the legislators. In Minnesota, we're very coordinated with that. We work with our students across the state to agree to our legislative agenda. Our board of trustees, all the presidents, all our faculty associations, and other associations within the Minnesota state system to go to the legislature with one agenda. But what has really been driving Minnesota, because it sets the tone of what our missions are as well within the colleges and universities. But one of the agendas in Minnesota is really understanding our demographics, and making sure that we're going to be competitive. And the Minnesota Chamber is also very concerned about how are we going to remain competitive as we diversify as a state. We have the largest Somali population outside of Somalia in Minnesota. And so there's a real focus on the workforce. I mentioned the funding that they've provided before, and now they're very focused in that funding, right? It's on apprenticeship, it's on dual training, it's on scholarships for high demand occupations. And so they're getting very focused because they're hearing from the employers, we can't find the workforce. And so it's our problem to solve.
Great. Other thoughts? Yeah.
I'd love to weigh in on this. To build on what was just shared, I think that there's a few things. One is that we in the public sector are about scale, right? We touch every one of our 7.4 million individuals in Washington state. It is about scale. And so public and private partnerships are essential with that, because it's like you all are putting the lighter fluid on the work that we need to do. That's one area. The other, as we mentioned before, was about quality, but it's also in thinking about what does the dignity of work mean? A quality job means a quality life. I had dinner once with the woman who's the CEO of Kaiser Permanente, Washington, and we were talking about healthcare. And we finished the whole conversation, and she said, but really the biggest factor in somebody's health is having a good job. And so how do we both start that in their lives where we create a culture of career, which is called the K-12 system? And how are you integrating it into our K-12 system, which is in the public sector? And then how does that continue? And how can government, in partnership with the private sector, be a guide and a support system throughout? And so I really feel like in the public sector, it is how are we creating a career continuum to ensure that people are lifelong career ready? We do not own that system. Again, our business partners and academic partners are an essential within that sort of tripartite system. But the policy aspects of it are understanding how do we invest and scale.
Paul, can I add a local flavor to this real quick?
Local flavor.
Yeah, and I mentioned it earlier, but our Faribault Public Schools, they failed their referendum the first time, right? And it wasn't until they came back and said, okay, we need to talk to the community college, we need to talk to the chamber, we need to talk to the Regional Economic Development Authority, and us all come together and focus on what it's gonna take to bring our school district up and raise the level of success with our students. And so, and had they not, it was a local tax referendum on property tax, right? They're not gonna do that until they see that there's a real strategy.
Right. So we have a set of questions. I want to though ask the panel one more question, then we'll move to the audience.
Let me add on the policy.
Sure.
Because I think that as a large corporation in the US, we clearly have an experience dealing with that. And our position has been always in IBM is, look, policy should be an enabler. Policy should be a framework where you operate. Sometimes policy tends to dictate the route and takes the role of dictating the trajectories, not necessarily in a way that covers all the possible scenarios, but in a way that is more popular or it was more visible at that moment, and then that gets fixed into law.
Yeah.
Okay? So, enabler,
Framework.
and don't get on the way of the private or partnerships ways.
Do I have time to ask one more question?
Absolutely, yes.
So let me flip it. So I spend a lot of my time talking to community colleges, talking to job training programs and so on. And I consistently hear, you know, I called up the CEO or the HR person at the local company. They didn't return my call. I can't get them interested in what we're doing. They complain, they can't find anybody, but they don't want to work with us, blah, 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 blah. So my question then is, what's the role of business here, and how do you successfully engage? Because after all, that's where the jobs are. So why is it difficult? Why do schools or governments even find it difficult to convene firms and get them really engaged in this? Now, your firm is clearly maybe the exception to that description, but I think it's an accurate description of the experience of most job training programs and even community colleges. So thoughts on that?
Well, I think that I've mentioned this, I think, to you before, Paul, but I think it's different when you're in a large urban area. We talked about Baltimore earlier. You don't recognize your community college in town, maybe, okay? But if you're in a smaller MSA, you're part of the community. You're part of the fabric of the community. And so we don't have that problem. And then you also make sure that you're, you know, for example, my cabinet, everybody's on the YMCA, the United Way, the chamber boards, the regional economic development. And once they see that you're at the table, then you become part of the solution. Not every community college does that and has that benefit, but I think it's important to do if you're going to really be a driver economically for your community.
Other thoughts on this? Jacob and then Susan.
I mean, I'd say like one of the challenges, like, so I can tell you the way that we go to market is that we try to avoid this kind of, we call CSR hell, right? In the sense that when you talk about some of these programs, automatically a lot of employers think, well, this is like a corporate social responsibility thing. Why don't you talk to our D&I guy? Or this is like a diversity play. Why don't you talk to HR? And the key thing is that I think is making our model work is that we can prove business value, right? This has to be seen more than just, hey, this is a nice thing to do, feel good about yourself. This has to be able to something where you can demonstrate this is a competitive advantage, right? Taking on this kind of a new approach to workforce will fundamentally strategically transform your business. And I think that's really what enables us to kind of get into really large companies and very quickly become sort of their preferred partner on these kind of programs.
Yeah.
So I think what's happened is with the importance of a university degree, businesses have been waiting at the end of that pipeline to slurp up that talent and been consumers instead of creators of talent.
Yep.
And again, seeing a culture in which that is very much a shift. It's exciting to see employers like IBM, like Amazon, like many others who are now stepping up to become creators of talent. That's one thing. But in also talking, not with you all, but with many different community colleges, they will approach me and say, man, you know, we put together this whole big program, we did 5 years of development, and then we presented it to them, and they didn't like it.
It's afterthought.
And what it needs to be, you've heard this, I'm sure, what it needs to be is not business invited, but business invested. And it's how from the outset do you stop the Heisman to business and instead bring them in a warm, big bear hug and have them at the outset involved, because education can't keep pace with innovation without business.
Right.
It's got to come together, and it's only in those conditions that we will be able to be the workforce of the future.
So we'll turn now. I want to make one editorial comment, which is it's important for people to understand, and this panel reflects that. This is a huge country. There's multiple ways for people to obtain skills, right? You can obtain skills on the job. You can obtain skills in community colleges. You can go to an innovative new startup that has new ideas about how to check. Government programs and apprenticeship models are both ways of obtaining skill. We're not about, I don't think, putting all of our eggs in one basket, making a bet on one model. We're about supporting multiple models and then maybe thinking about how to knit them together through some set of quality measures. I mean, that's the name of the game, at least as I see it. So, take it to you.
We have a lot of great questions. I think we have time for just a couple. The top one right now is, do you think there's a difference in skills or value between learning to code from a boot camp or a specialized program versus a 4-year degree in computer science?
Not at all. And we need to change the systems of recruitment. That's a big part of our role as companies. And we were part of the problem because IBM owns a very large system that is called the Kenexa, where it's an applicant tracking system. And one of the first things that the old version used to do is to immediately create a hierarchy of preference for the job with bachelor degree, yes, no. And with that, you create a triage immediately on the wrong direction. So we have changed that. And as a companies, as organizations, we need to start much more clear on hiring by skills. It takes discipline, it takes conviction, it takes a little of enforcing from HR, from the business leaders, but if you hire by skills, it works. In IBM, we are eating our own cookies. Last year, we hired more than 15% of our total hire in the US, people without a bachelor degree.
I'll add one thing, because government is the largest employer in the United States. And so as an employer, where I have almost 2,000 employees, one of the things we're adding to all position descriptions is or related experience. And so I think that as we move forward and thinking about how do you open things up, that's an area in which to do it for government too.
Next question.
Next question. So Ryan from Somerset Berkeley High School wants to know, so when talking about skill development, we've heard certification and online solutions, right? But so what's his role as a public school teacher in this skill development?
So, I mean, do you want to weigh in? I'm happy to weigh in on this. His role in terms of skill development is going to be changing over time, and it's going to be pretty exciting. I think we're going to be moving from, all right, I've completed algebra, to here are the different segments within it. And eventually, I'd say probably, I would predict within the next 20 years, you'll get to much more, I think the buzzword is having stackable credentials. And what does that look like on a more micro scale within schools? And having that flow from what will be post K-12 into that K-12 environment will be pretty exciting to see, and really breaking down what are those skills. So for him to stay nimble and stay on top of what's happening in this arena will be important.
And I'll add a different flavor to this because you know, higher education has tools that support student success, AI tools that support student success. And it's important for teachers to really understand that. We were talking at lunch, even crowdsourcing. So some of the software, for example, let's take a community college student, which we know is part-time. If they can start picking the classes that fit best within their work schedule, and the administration, the college can begin to see that. How do you schedule those? How does the instructor recognize that a student needs an emergency grant and hit a button to make sure that they get the services that they need to be successful? And then one of the major challenges we have is not enough counselors for the student population. And we can remove some of those things with technology and let the counselors focus on the most critical events.
I will just add one word, curiosity. We need people with more curiosity to have this lifelong learning mindset.
So last question, what community in the US sticks out as an example of doing all this right? You can't name your own.
At least from my experience, I think that there are a few places that are really breaking out on this. I would say Colorado and what they're doing with intermediary there across the state. I'd say that Charleston, South Carolina, in partnership with Trident Community College, is doing some phenomenal work. I would point also to Wisconsin, which for many years has had policy in support of this. And I would point to Minneapolis and the area around Minneapolis has really been at the forefront of driving this partnership between academia, government, and business to help individuals open up more pathways. I would, of course, say Washington State, but you told me that I couldn't.
I'll say it.
Thank you.
I would also say Tennessee.
Yes, true too.
And I will add Rhode Island because of the component of entrepreneurship and the investment that the state is doing there to really complete. I think that one big piece that we have not talked here is you have to generate people that generate their own jobs. We cannot still thinking on this paradigm that you prepare for jobs and somebody will pay a salary.
Right, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.